Hey everyone, hope everyone's doing okay and staying safe these days. So here we are, the MSI B550 MPG gaming Carbon motherboard. This actually has Wi-Fi and Bluetooth in it, and I'm really excited to actually be reviewing this motherboard. This, in my opinion, is probably one of the top B550 motherboards available, and let's go ahead and dive in, get this motherboard installed, get it unboxed, even though it already is. Let's go ahead and get it unboxed anyway, and get it installed and do a little quick BIOS overview as well too. Just taking a quick look at the box here before we go ahead and unbox it. It does seem like this one does not actually have the Ryzen 5000 CPU ready sticker on it. Usually they literally stick it right over this little one right here. So basically this one may not support Ryzen 5000 class CPUs. Out of the box, no big deal. There's two methods to actually go ahead. Basically just a regular BIOS update. But if that's not an option here for you, you also do have the option to do a BIOS update without the CPU installed, and there's definitely instructions on how to do that. Let's go ahead and open this up. And I actually do prefer when they pack the motherboard like this, basically a box within a box, so to speak. You can actually just remove it really easily, and all the other stuff is, jumbled up all over the place here, but no big deal. Let's go ahead and take a look here. Of course, your CD with drivers and whatnot, which many people don't really use much anymore these days. Here's a little label that I did mention in other videos, but they didn't actually come with it. This one did. Basically a little MSI reward program. I guess if you do buy some of their products and whatnot, you can actually get a couple little rewards like that little dragon over here. Of course, thank you for choosing the MSI product right over here. Looks like a little dragon badge. Used to be a lot thicker. This one looks like just more a little sticker. The other one had a little metallic feeling from before. Little book here, just demonstrating some video cards and other products that MSI does offer. A couple of little stickers here. These are basically like cable labels for SATA cables. You can actually see over here a little diagram of exactly how these are used. I've definitely enjoyed seeing these, but never really actually used them myself, so there's that. Quick installation guide for CPU installation and some other information that are pretty useful. Right there. Case stand notification, very interesting. Something to keep in mind here. I guess it's basically those little spacer, having to do with little spacer screwdrivers and whatnot, and nuts actually are right below the motherboard. Go ahead and bring this here, and here is your manual over here for your motherboard. This one's actually looks like a little thinner than other MSI based motherboards. Manuals that I've actually used before, so it's actually a little welcome change, all that paper being wasted, so to speak. Obviously, many veteran PC builders probably don't use this, unless of course they're just making a quick reference where the front panel connections on the motherboard are and go. Little, looks like this is possibly an LED cable, I believe. And of course, looks like two SATA cables here. This looks like, nope, this looks like your LED cable right here actually. And of course your little antennas for the Wi-Fi that go on the back of the motherboard. This motherboard does have Wi-Fi and Bluetooth built in. And lastly is your M2 screws for your M2 drives, your NVMe SSDs that go right on the motherboard itself. These are actually really important. Though after a couple of motherboards, I'm starting to actually have quite a number of these, but never can have too many of them. Let's go ahead and take the motherboard out. And here she is. Definitely quite a bit of weight to this particular board. You do see that the back shield I/O plate is actually built into this motherboard, which I definitely do welcome. I'm really starting to like these kind of designs here who really wants to put that separate backplate and have it, you know, completely forget to install it anyway. But actually go ahead and take a look at the board. And pretty solid looking. A little bit of a black, silver, gray color tone over here. So definitely match your cases if you have the same color tone. Do see the big carbon label here with little stickers that do protect this from scratches, and one over here as well too. Let's take a quick look here at the motherboard itself. A closer look at the board here, we do start seeing some connections. Here, of course, is your front panel audio connection. If you want to go ahead and connect the cable here for headphone and microphone connections on the front panel of the computer. Here, of course, is your LED 4-pin connection in this area. Some other little connections here as well too. Over here, it looks like a 4-pin fan connection, which actually can use a 3-pin as well. Moving a little further here, looks like this is a clear CMOS button. Right over here, in case obviously your computer is not posting, you can definitely press this button just to start from scratch. This switch over here, basically for LED, related to your LED connections. Definitely have to look into that one a little bit deeper. Right over here, looks like we do have another 4-pin fan connection. Over here, some old style USB 2 front panel connections as well. Move that over here. You can actually see them both marked as USB. This is actually pretty useful. I really wish they would kind of put this little painting here on other connections as well too. And of course here you do have your USB 3 front panel connection right over here, which is really popular and in use quite a bit. Moving a little bit further here, we do have a couple more connections. These are of course your connections for your front panel. Obviously something to refer to the manual to here. You're going to have your LED connections, hard drive reset buttons, and I believe this will probably be your 4-pin for a PC speaker if anyone really still uses that. And it looks like another little connection here as well too. On this particular motherboard, you do have another little fan connection here, but right next to it, you do have 6 SATA ports. Many motherboard manufacturers are actually reducing the number of SATA ports, even reducing them now to 4, to even like mid-range to high-end motherboards, but obviously we do have 6 here, so definitely something to keep in mind. Moving up further, something that I really do like MSI including on their B550 chipset-based motherboards is a USB Type-C connection here for a front panel connection, which is really, really useful. And of course, your 24-pin power connection for the motherboard itself. A little up here, you do have 2 more system fan connections, both of them 4-pin up here. And of course, not to be missed are 4 DIMM slots here for memories. Doesn't look like these are actually color-coded for dual channel use, but you know, obviously they are dual channel, ideally to use this one over here, and of course this one here if you're only going to be using the ideal 2 chip setup. Looking at the top, you also do have an additional 2 fan connections here, along with some other fan connections here. Looks like this one may be related to LED as well too. And this humongous looking heat sink up here, definitely blocking the way of the CPU socket, but there it is right there. Try to focus in a little better. There you go. Your AM4 socket for your CPU in this area right here. And just on the top, last but not least, you do have your CPU connections for power, your standard 8-pin and an additional 4-pin if you plan to require a couple more bits of power into this board for CPU overclocking and other options. Looking at the back here, you do have a number of USB ports, looks like about 8 of them. One of them is Type-C. You do have your built-in DisplayPort and HDMI connection. And of course a button here to flash your BIOS without a CPU. That's a whole process there, so definitely look into the manual if you'd like more information on that. Right over here, you do have your 2.5 gigabit LAN port. Obviously this is becoming more standard and pretty useful as the gigabit, just a regular gigabit port, usually by Intel or some other brands, are actually being phased out little by little. Speaking of networking, you do have your Wi-Fi connections right over here, basically where those little antennas that I mentioned earlier, right over here will go. You definitely do have the option to connect other antennas as well too, but obviously just bear in mind these 2 connections are right next to each other, so just make sure it's physically possible. And of course, your audio connections over here, your standard red over here. Usually it was green, now it's red, okay. For your basically left and right speaker, and of course down here, your optical connection for connecting for surround sound and other pretty interesting speaker systems out there. Let's take a look at the board as well too. Just a regular looking on the board here from the upside. Over here, you do have one of your NVMe connections underneath this little heatsink here. This is definitely removable. And you do have another one up here as well too. Let me just focus in a little better. Yep, right up here, you do have, this is actually the PCI Express Generation 4 slot. So if you are going to be installing one of these SSDs to be using one of these slots, use this one right up here. This, of course, is also your ideal connection and slot for your PCI Express video card as well too. This is also Generation 4. So just something to bear in mind if you'll be using SSD. These are your two main slots up here. Everything else will be Generation 3, so something to keep in mind if you'll be using another storage SSD here, or anything else that will require, for whatever reason, Generation 4 speeds. Taking another wonderful look here at the motherboard. Pretty solid looking. Can't complain so far whatsoever. Never actually looked at the back of the motherboard, but really not much to see. So let's go ahead and toss this into a case, get a CPU in here, put some memory on, and we'll take a look at the BIOS itself. All right, everyone, looks like the PC is booted up. CPU, memory, everything has been installed. Computer has posted, and here we are in the BIOS. Everything looking pretty good so far. Give you guys a little bit of a funny little thing here. If you do see the CPU, it's the Ryzen 7 1700 8-core processor. So I may have mentioned this in another video before. This particular B550 chipset-based motherboard does support first generation and very likely second generation Ryzen CPUs. Don't tell anyone I told you that though, but there you go. You actually see the full name of the motherboard right on top. So basically here's your standard easy mode view over here. You can actually go ahead and toggle between the two of them. Click on advanced or hit F7. You'll see this amazing looking picture here. And obviously now we're in the advanced mode for the BIOS. Let's go back to easy mode. I'll go ahead and do a quick brief walkthrough of the entire process. Up here in the corner, you do see your CPU speed and your current DDR speed. Obviously, if this is DDR speed, memory speed is incorrect, you can go ahead and change that in the advanced section here. Obviously, the memory I do have installed here does have some XMP profiles, looks like 2 of them. So you can actually click on each one to go ahead and actually have those applied here as well. So I'll go ahead and just leave it on number 1 for the time being. It does give you some details here, but you can definitely go ahead and look into this a little bit deeper in the advanced section. Go ahead on the left side, if you click on CPU, you do see your CPU. If you click on memory, you do see your current memory speed, the frequency, right now 2133. This particular memory does support 3000 speed, so you actually do see the profiles over here. Probably go ahead and pick on number 2, I guess. And of course, this actually tell you which slots are actually being used here. We do have them in the ideal slots here, 2 and 4, when only using 2 memory slots, adding up to 32 gigabytes of memory. Under storage, you'll actually see all the SATA ports and their current status, as well as your M2 slots as well. Right now, I do not have any storage devices connected here, but you actually see all the details of each drive once they're connected here. Under fan, you do have some basic fan speeds here, CPU, and of course any other system fans. You can just go ahead and click on each one. You'll see their current RPM. Obviously, if they're set to 0, it means there's nothing connected there. Click on number 5 here, you do see a fan speed right now. Of course, there's another one. This particular case has 2 built-in fans. Connect more of them, you'll definitely see more of them. And under help, just a couple little options here for basically hotkeys. The F1 keys can be used to just jump into a particular option below as well. Just below here, you do see the M flash button. If you actually want to go ahead and flash your BIOS, you do have that option here. I'm going to click on no, otherwise the computer is just going to reboot and start the flash process. Under favorites, you do have a couple of favorites here that you can actually load up. And of course, one of my favorite sections in any MSI-based motherboard is the hardware monitor. We can go ahead and just basically change the thresholds between the fan speeds and temperatures for all fans, including your CPU. And of course, a pump fan right up here as well. Looks like there's about a number of fan connections on this motherboard, which actually makes it very, very ideal as well if you do have a lot of fans. Below here, you do see some further options for your LAN option ROM, basically to actually have the computer boot up from LAN. You can actually go ahead and turn off your audio sound card here if you do have a dedicated sound card instead that you'd like to use. One of my computers definitely does have one. Basically your CSM, UEFI boot mode, obviously your SATA mode here as well too, RGB light control, and some other options as well. Just below up here, you do have the boot priority. You can actually move these around. Basically have a priority for which device you want priority for. So obviously in this case, you would probably want the drive where your operating system is installed to be your first priority, but you can always definitely put something like a USB up here as well too if you do plan to, on occasion boot up from a USB. You can always feel free to hit the F11 or F12 key to actually go ahead and manually select a boot device. I can forget which one it is. I believe it's actually F12 on MSI motherboards to actually go ahead and select which boot device you'd like to boot up from, when available, of course. So that's basically the good workaround here of the easy mode here. Let's go ahead and switch over. Obviously up here in the corner, you do have the option to change the language, and some other options here, basically a search and whatnot. I'm going to go ahead and click on advanced here, so we can go ahead to the advanced mode, do a quick overview of that as well too. Very similar options obviously off the bat. You do see your XMP profiles, you do see your boot list over here you can still do this with. But obviously much more options on the left and the right sides. Go ahead and go to settings, you'll see the immediately system status. and also options to go ahead and change the system date and time. Under advanced, you do have a couple of options here you can go ahead and manipulate the board with. One thing very popular I like to go through here is the integrated preferables, and you can actually go ahead and enable or disable certain things here. This is particularly a desktop, so for example, I usually disable the Wi-Fi since I'm not really using it. Disabling this obviously will still allow you to use the built-in Bluetooth, which can obviously be pretty useful to you if you need it. Some other options here if you wanted to go ahead and turn on hot plug on any of the SATA ports as well. Boot, obviously you can go ahead and old traditional style method to go ahead and select and prioritize boot devices here. You can go ahead and select your boot mode. Obviously, if you're using Windows 10 or later, just go ahead and select this. May be a little ideal so it doesn't search for any legacy boot devices or actually boot up in a legacy way as well. Some other options here as well too you do see for boot. On the security, just some basic little options here to put basically a password to the BIOS. Obviously a chassis intrusion configuration if you do have that little sensor to advise you if the case has actually been opened up. I know many manufacturers like Dell and whatnot definitely do have that option. And this is obviously very important for Windows 11, your trusted computing TPM option. This is something you definitely want to go ahead and turn on. One little thing with MSI motherboards, definitely go ahead and update the BIOS to the latest version. I did notice that slightly older BIOS firmware versions may have a little trouble booting up into Windows 11 setup, and go ahead and take care of that so you do see the full options for the TPM. Obviously they've updated this to go ahead and coincide with Windows 11 basically needing and requiring TPM here. Now of course obviously in your settings you do have the option to go ahead and save and exit. It'll definitely confirm to you once you want to go ahead and do that. Some other options here as well. Moving on to OC, we do have many options to go ahead and overclock your CPU and of course your memory as well too. Take notice here and take care as well too. Choosing wrong options here can damage your hardware or just basically cause it to overheat. Obviously here another section here to go ahead and change the memory profile, which we do see. You can also go ahead and manually select the frequency, which I'm going to go ahead and just select 3000. Below here some more options for memory, timings and whatnot. Obviously definitely do know what you're doing before messing with these particular options. And below some other options related to the CPU. See some specs here, but obviously you do see this option, CPU configuration, advanced CPU configuration, and some options. One little option I like to actually turn off on occasion is basically where the frequency is forced to actually go beyond the dedicated frequency of the CPU on occasion, basically like a turbo mode, so to speak. And sometimes that does cause the CPU temperature to spike on occasion, which I do find a little bit annoying, and you can definitely hear the fan revving up. So I usually actually turn that off. I believe this is this option right over here. Not something you have to do, but just as an example, you have a lot of options here to manipulate your CPU and of course your memory. Last little option on the left, obviously your M flash button to go ahead and update your BIOS. So obviously we've already gone over that. Same option here as well. Looking on the right side, we do have overclocking profile. Basically, once you actually make some changes, you can definitely go ahead and save those changes to a particular profile as like a preset setting. You can go ahead and actually load those up and boot up from it. You even do have the option to actually load profiles from a USB and of course some other ways that have actually been saved. I actually have not really messed with these settings, but I can definitely see how they can be useful. Of course, once again, the hardware monitoring. So you can go ahead and actually select basic thresholds. If I were to bring these up all the way, you immediately start to notice that the CPU RPM begins to increase to coincide with the new threshold I actually set up. The CPU fans, wraith coolers of these Ryzen CPUs are pretty quiet, so I don't even think I actually hear any change whatsoever so far. And of course, down here, another little cute option with MSI-based motherboards here is your Board Explorer, where you can actually hover your mouse over particular options to go ahead and see in the red area what is actually connected here. For example, I do have a Rockcat mouse and a keyboard connected to these two USBs, so it does immediately tell you that as well. Obviously, you can see your CPU here again. The memory sticks, these are G.Skill memory sticks. I run at 3000 frequency, 3000 megahertz. Of course, some details on your video card. And other devices, if you actually have any SATA ports in use, you will see those devices connected to them here as well. Those actually tell me that there's a fan connection here. It just gives me the basic RPM. So cute little options here to actually see. And unfortunately, my USB-C type C connector is currently not being used, so that's why it's just blacked out at this time. I actually do find this particular option here a little useful to some degree. So that's basically a pretty quick walkthrough of all the options in this MSI motherboard. Obviously, immediately after you hit escape, it does give you the option to quit without saving. But if you go back to settings and save and exit, you immediately see the changes over here, like basically a punch list of all the changes you made so far to the motherboard, and actually go ahead and click on yes to go ahead and reboot. So you immediately see the computer is going to turn off and all the changes you made will come back up. So I'm just going to go ahead and reboot, hit the delete key to go right back into the BIOS again, and just show you those changes that I've actually made in use and completely active. Wait for it. And here we are. Obviously, you do see the memory is now at 3000, and pretty much the other options have changed as well too, are now in effect. Quick look at the motherboard itself while it's actually on. We do see there's some coloring, RGB coloring on the bottom part, and a little bit on the top. I think mostly on the bottom. Basically, the top is probably just the memory chips. I actually do see some right over there, basically just nearby the back plate and I/O shield as well too. So a little bit of color options here. This motherboard actually is probably one of the better tier and probably one of the best B550 chipset based boards I've actually used so far. Definitely a lot of options. 2.5 gigabit is obviously pretty good. The option for a USB 3 Type-C is really good as well too. And all around just a lot of USB ports, SATA ports, and other options. So this actually might be a pretty good flagship motherboard to actually get your hands on if you do need access to Ryzen 5000 based CPUs. One, a really good chipset board, but not necessarily breaking the wallet as well too. This is actually a pretty good recommendation so far. Pretty quiet too. Go ahead and just turn it off real quick and turn it back on. I would say it probably doesn't really take long at all to post, but again, go ahead and update that BIOS, as I've definitely noticed post times improve with every revision of the BIOS for MSI motherboards in general. Anyway, hope everyone found this useful. Pretty amazing motherboard here. I've been really glad I could get my hands on it and actually see it in use. I did previously have this motherboard in mind over a year, maybe 2 years ago, I would say, for a family member's new build. But unfortunately, I did have the Ryzen 2700 CPU in mind and ended up returning this board in favor of the upper X570 chipset-based board, with the impression that the Ryzen second generation Ryzen CPUs will not work. And if the first generation works, the second one will too. And I wish that's something I actually tested out earlier. Could have saved a few bucks, but oh well. Definitely let me know if you have any comments or questions about this particular board. Anything I missed, let me know. Shoot a like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video and found it useful. As always, thanks again for watching, everyone, and stay safe. Take care.